The stranger, however, didn't miss a beat. "I see," they replied, their voice steady. "But it seems to me that Maya here has been nothing but professional. Don't you think so?" They turned to Maya, their eyes warm and reassuring, as though silently urging her to speak. Maya hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room watching, waiting. Her mind raced. Should she speak up? Could she risk it? Meanwhile, whispers began to ripple through the restaurant. A couple at a nearby table leaned in closer, their curiosity piqued. At the back of the room, the manager stood frozen, clearly unsure of how to intervene, or if they even should. As the tension deepened, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about an arrogant customer or a struggling waitress. It was about something bigger, about respect, humanity, and the power dynamics that so often go unchecked. But how far would the stranger go to tip the scales? Maya swallowed hard, her pulse racing as the stranger's kind yet expectant gaze lingered on her. She felt a sudden urge to say something, to finally push back against the unfair treatment she had endured all evening. But before she could open her mouth, Mr. Donovan let out a dry chuckle, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "Well, I suppose opinions differ," he said, leaning back in his chair with a forced air of ease. "Though I'd expect anyone in her position to handle a little constructive criticism without taking it so personally." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, drawing sharp breaths and exchanged glances from nearby tables. Maya clenched her fists, her carefully maintained composure starting to crack. How could someone so casually dismiss the harm they caused? It was as if her feelings and her dignity didn't matter at all. The stranger didn't flinch. Their calm demeanor only seemed to grow more deliberate. "Criticism," they repeated, their voice measured but carrying an unmistakable edge. Funny how often that word is used to excuse disrespect. But let me ask you this. What makes you think you're in a position to critique someone working tirelessly to serve you? Mr. Donovan stiffened, his smug expression faltering. "I beg your pardon," he said, his tone colder now, defensive. By now, the entire restaurant was invested. Waitstaff paused in their tracks, diners whispered among themselves, and the manager, still rooted to the spot, looked increasingly unsure about what to do. Maya could feel the tension in the air, thick and almost suffocating, but also electric with anticipation. The stranger leaned forward, their voice lowering but growing sharper, like a blade cutting through the noise. "I think you owe Maya an apology," they said, each word deliberate. "Not just for the way you spoke to her, but for assuming that her job somehow makes her less deserving of respect." Maya's breath hitched, her heart thudding in her chest. The boldness of those words left her stunned. She could see Mr. Donovan's jaw tighten, his face reddening as though the weight of his own behavior had finally been turned back on him. But how would he respond? Would he double down, or would he finally confront the truth of his actions? For a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Mr. Donovan's reaction. His face was a mix of indignation and embarrassment, his polished image now under scrutiny. He leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. "I don't know who you think you are, but I don't need a lecture about how to behave in public." The stranger didn't flinch, their expression calm and unwavering. Before they could respond, Maya's voice broke through the tension, soft but steady. "It's not about public behavior, sir. It's about kindness." The words surprised even her, and she felt her cheeks flush as every eye turned toward her. But she didn't stop. "We all have bad days, but treating someone poorly doesn't make your day better. It just makes it harder for everyone else." The room was silent, the weight of Maya's words hanging in the air. Mr. Donovan opened his mouth, ready to retort, but before he could speak, the second twist hit. From across the room, a tall man in a sharp suit stepped forward, his expression unreadable. It was the restaurant's owner, someone rarely seen on the floor, but clearly paying attention tonight. "I couldn't agree more," the owner said, his voice carrying across the room with quiet authority. He glanced at Maya. offering her a small nod of encouragement before turning his attention to Mr. Donovan. "I've heard everything, and I think it's time we addressed a few things." Mr. Donovan's composure cracked, his confidence visibly faltering. "Wait a minute," he stammered, his tone shifting to something almost pleading. "There's no need to make a scene." The restaurant buzzed with the usual dinner rush, the air alive with laughter, the clink of glasses, and the hum of conversations. Among the busy waitstaff was Maya, a young, hard-working waitress with a radiant smile that could brighten anyone's day. She moved swiftly between tables, balancing plates and customer requests with a grace that belied the chaos around her. But tonight, Maya's patience would be tested in a way she never imagined. Seated at one of her tables was Mr. Donovan, a well-dressed CEO, known as much for his business acumen as for his sharp tongue. The moment Maya approached, his disapproving gaze swept over her, and the condescension began. His remarks, though subtle at first, grew louder and harsher with each passing minute. He criticized the menu, the service, and finally, Maya herself, as if her very presence was an inconvenience to his world. The room seemed to shrink under the weight of his words, with nearby diners casting uneasy glances but saying nothing. Maya, ever professional, handled the situation with remarkable composure, her warm smile never faltering. But the hurt in her eyes was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, someone unexpected entered the scene. A figure of quiet authority, with a calm yet commanding presence, stepped in. This person had power, not just in title or wealth, but in the way they carried themselves. They had been watching the entire exchange, and now they decided it was time to act. What happened next left the entire restaurant stunned, and it's a moment you won't want to miss. Stay tuned as this story unfolds, revealing a powerful lesson about respect, dignity, and standing up for what's right. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath as the person stepped forward, their footsteps soft but deliberate. Dressed in a tailored suit that hinted at influence but not arrogance, they carried an air of quiet confidence that instantly commanded attention. A few heads turned, curiosity flickering across the faces of nearby diners. Who was this person, and why were they walking straight toward Mr. Donovan's table? Maya stood frozen, her tray trembling slightly in her hands. She had dealt with rude customers before, but there was something uniquely cutting about Mr. Donovan's words, as though he relished every insult he threw her way. She wanted to speak up, to defend herself, but she knew the risks. In her line of work, speaking back to someone with power could cost her not just a tip, but her entire job. So she stood there, silently enduring the verbal barrage, until the stranger decided to intervene. "Excuse me," the person said, their tone polite yet firm, their voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Mr. Donovan glanced up, his expression shifting from annoyance to faint recognition. It was clear he hadn't expected anyone to call him out, much less someone who seemed to belong to the same elite social circle as him. "Is there a problem here?" the newcomer asked, their eyes briefly meeting Maya's before settling on Mr. Donovan. For the first time that evening, Mr. Donovan looked unsettled. His bravado wavered as he shifted in his seat, clearly trying to decide how to handle this unexpected challenge. "No problem at all," Mr. Donovan said, his voice tight. But the stranger wasn't convinced. They pulled out a chair and sat down uninvited, their calm demeanor making it clear they weren't leaving until the situation was addressed. Maya's heart raced. Who was this person, and why did they seem so determined to help? What unfolded next would reveal more than just the truth about Mr. Donovan. It would expose the kind of power that truly matters. The room remained hushed, the soft clatter of dishes and murmured conversations fading into the background. Maya couldn't help but glance between the two figures at her table. Mr. Donovan, once so sure of himself, now seemed smaller, his smug confidence replaced by a strained politeness. The stranger, however, maintained their steady gaze, their presence unshakable. "I couldn't help but overhear," the newcomer said calmly, their tone carrying just enough weight to make Mr. Donovan shift uncomfortably. Your comments about the service here, was there something specific you found unsatisfactory? Their words were pointed, yet delivered with such grace that it was impossible to call them rude. Mr. Donovan forced a laugh, waving his hand dismissively. "Oh, you know how it is," he said, his voice trying to regain its usual commanding tone. "Standards are important, especially in places like this. Sometimes people need a little push to rise to the occasion." Maya felt her chest tighten at his words. A little push. Every word out of his mouth had been designed to tear her down. She gripped the edge of her tray, her fingers trembling as she fought to keep her emotions in check. But the owner shook his head. "You already made a scene. I'm simply ensuring everyone sees it for what it is." He then turned to Maya. "I've watched you handle this with more grace than most could muster, and I think you deserve to know that people see it." The tension shifted, the stakes now higher as the owner's involvement brought an unexpected layer of accountability. But as Mr. Donovan's face darkened, it became clear he wasn't ready to back down just yet. What he said next would take everyone by surprise. Mr. Donovan's jaw clenched as he squared his shoulders, trying to regain control of the unraveling situation. His voice, though shaky, carried a hint of defiance. "With all due respect, I've been a loyal customer here for years. I expect a certain standard of service, and I don't think it's out of line to demand it." The owner's calm demeanor didn't waver. "We value all our customers," he said evenly. "But loyalty doesn't grant anyone the right to demean or mistreat the people who work here. That's a standard we don't compromise on." His words were measured, but there was an unmistakable finality to them. Before Mr. Donovan could respond, the stranger, who had been quietly observing, spoke again. "Perhaps this is a good moment to reflect, Mr. Donovan," they said, their tone thoughtful. "Because loyalty works both ways. You might want to consider how your behavior reflects on you beyond these walls." Something shifted in the room. Mr. Donovan's eyes narrowed, his expression darkening. "You talk a lot about respect," he snapped, his voice rising. "But do you have any idea who I am? I could have this place shut down with one phone call." The threat hung heavy in the air, but before anyone could react, the stranger reached into their jacket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. They opened it, revealing an official badge that gleamed under the dim restaurant lighting. Gasps rippled through the room as they placed it calmly on the table. "I know exactly who you are," the stranger said, their voice now carrying an unmistakable authority. "And I also know who I am. Special Investigator Langston, Department of Labor. I'm here following reports of workplace harassment and discrimination at your company, Mr. Donovan." The room froze. Even Maya's breath caught in her throat. Mr. Donovan's face turned ashen, his bravado crumbling in an instant. This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, his usual arrogance replaced with desperation. Langston leaned forward, their eyes unyielding. "We'll see about that. But tonight, I think you owe Maya an apology, and a lot more than that." The restaurant erupted into murmurs as the weight of the revelation settled. Maya's heart raced, her initial shock giving way to a sense of vindication she hadn't dared hope for. This was a night no one in the room would ever forget. The room was still buzzing with whispers as Mr. Donovan sat frozen in his chair, his usual air of dominance stripped away. For a moment, he looked as though he might protest, but the weight of the situation, and the badge glinting on the table, left him speechless. All eyes were on him, waiting for his next move. Maya stood silently, her tray clutched tightly to her chest, trying to process everything. She had spent the entire evening holding back her feelings, swallowing her pride to keep the peace. But now the tables had turned in a way she never expected. Slowly, she exhaled, her trembling hands steadying as she met Mr. Donovan's gaze. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. The words felt forced, but they were there. He looked down, avoiding everyone's eyes, his bravado replaced by quiet shame. Maya didn't say anything, unsure how to respond. She didn't need a performance or empty words. What she wanted was change. And tonight, for the first time, she felt like her voice had been heard. The owner stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Maya's shoulder. "Take a break," he said softly. "You've done enough tonight." His kindness nearly brought tears to her eyes, but she nodded, finally setting her tray down as she walked toward the kitchen. As Maya disappeared from view, Langston rose, pocketing their badge. "We'll be in touch," they said to Mr. Donovan, their tone making it clear this was far from over. Then they turned to the owner, offering a polite nod. "You've built a good place here. Don't let anyone tear it down." The tension in the room began to ease as the evening resumed. Maya sat in the break room, her heart still racing but lighter than it had been all night. She thought about Langston's words, about the Emma standing up for her, and about the courage she had found within herself to face the moment. By the time she left the restaurant that night, the air outside felt fresher, the stars brighter. Respect and kindness, she realized, had a way of cutting through even the darkest moments, and that made all the difference.